This is a meeting of the Sustainability Committee. It's not an official committee. We're not taking any votes. We're not making decisions. We're here to get information, possibly make recommendations to the full Shaker Lane Building Committee. With that, I'll turn it over to either Mary Lee or Merrill. I'm not sure who's going to talk and present.
It'll be me.
You should be able to. Yep.
Okay, great. So before I dive into this, I would like to do a few introductions. I'll start with Studio G, and we could just do ourselves, and then we can move through the town and then people outside of the SBC. So I'm Mary Lee Mercy. I'm project architect with Studio G.
Meryl Nisler, Senior Project Manager with Studio G.
Steve Mitchell with Studio G.
Matt Woodward, HVAC Engineer with GGD Consulting Engineers.
Eric Ruoff with the Green Engineer, Sustainable Design Consultant.
Matt, did Matt go yet?
Matt went, yeah.
All right. Mark Stafford.
Hi, Mark Stafford, Turner Townsend here, Town's Owners Project Manager.
Okay, I'm Steve Mark. I'm the school business manager, non-voting member of the Shaker Lane Building Committee, and a member of the Sustainability Committee. Steve Moore.
Steve Moore, Chairman of the Shaker Lane School Building Committee.
Okay, Diane.
Diane Dickerson, Special Projects out of the Town Administrator's Office.
Mike.
Mike Scaduto. I'm on the Shaker Lane Building Committee and the PMBC.
Charlotte.
Hi, Charlotte Dolan's Littleton resident and a member of the Sustainability Committee.
Okay, and we also have Dave Riley with us.
Dave Riley, School District Energy Manager.
And I think did I miss anybody? If I did, unmute yourself and speak up. All right.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It seems like we have a really good group of people today. I promise we'll get you out of here in an hour. So this agenda, we're going to be talking about general goals and cover what you're going to be getting in the new school, just as a baseline, a default. And then we'll be talking about what we can achieve beyond that, what is within reach. I think as Steve Moore put it before, however much green our green can afford. And we'll get into some specifics about mechanical system and about where some funding is coming from. So we already did introduction, but with you on our side is the architect as well as our mechanical consultant, Matt Woodward, as well as our green consultant who are helping us out with sustainability in general, as well as lead points, and that's Eric. So because this is a workshop function of Zoom, I think somebody mentioned it looks different from regular Zoom. That's because it's a workshop format. So if you have a question, you can click the little button to raise your hand, or if you're a member of the public, you can also, I think you have to type your comment into the chat, and then Steve Mark should be able to see that and then can read the comments. And there will be a few times that I pause to allow for discussion. All right, so for anybody not familiar with the project or anybody who is watching this later from the recording, this is for the Shaker Lane Elementary, which is a pre-K through grade 2 school. It is located right here in the town of Littleton. And here's a blow up of the site. And the new school is set to be located at the upper field. While the new school is in operation, the new school will be constructed. Everybody will move into the new school. The old school will be demolished and will be replaced with some playing fields. Some more fun facts about the school. It is for 435 students in K-2, plus enough classrooms to accommodate 48 to 60 students in pre-K. New construction, 2 floors tall. It's going to include some ability for the community to use some of the spaces after hours, such as the gymnasium and the cafeteria, and it's oriented so that the lower field and the new fields down below will be really accessible to the community with parking and drive aisles. We don't have a recent cost estimate, but the discussions that we're having today will contribute to discussions that we need to include in the information when we get our next estimate, and that is scheduled to happen in the summer. All right, so the SBC has already done a ton of work in terms of looking at a bunch of different options, considering different sites. They established a long list of evaluation criteria. They applied that to each of the options as we looked at them. First and foremost in the evaluation criteria was looking at whether or not it can meet the educational program of the district, as well as cost and being really responsible with the town's money. They also looked at the best site, location, community, and neighborhood, and they focused to some extent on sustainability, but tonight we're doing a really deep dive into more aspects of sustainability for the project. All right, so getting into what the project will include already. So because this is getting funding from the MSBA, which is a state organization that gets its money from the sales tax and then contributes to various communities to help them build new schools or renovate old schools. We don't have exact numbers yet, but we have been estimating that the MSBA is going to be covering around 30 to 35% of the overall project. So in order to meet the MSBA guidelines, the school needs to achieve silver certification in LEED at a minimum. It needs to meet stretch code standards, which some communities in Massachusetts are not stretch code communities, but luckily Littleton is, so we would be doing that anyhow. And the project must be both photovoltaic ready and electric vehicle ready, which means that we need to have all of the infrastructure there for the chargers or the solar panels to be installed at a later date. And this is the minimum. We can, of course, talk about actually installing some of those things now, but we're talking baseline of what you're getting here. This is called the MSBA Green Schools Program. This is not to be confused with the Green Ribbon School Program, which is another program that's done through the U.S. Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, or DESE. So Littleton's looking pretty good on the sustainability front so far. So because this is at least a LEED Silver school, LEED requires us to look at a whole bunch of different categories that affect sustainability and affects the health and wellness of the building occupants. As we are moving through this process, we will be considering all of these different aspects, and many decisions are going to be baked in. For example, we're already going to have efficient lighting systems. We're going to be considering the acoustics. We'll be looking at efficient systems in general and trying to reduce water where we can, and choosing healthy materials. So the reason I'm going into all of this is because over the summer, we did a community survey. You may or may not have seen it, but we got back a lot of responses where people mentioned that sustainability was important to them, and they were asking whether or not the school was going to include a lot of these things. So we wanted to let people know that many of these things are already baked in, things that people were asking about. And a few other things people mentioned are things that they're open for discussion. Either they are easily achievable within the goals we're going to talk about tonight, or maybe they're a little bit more aspirational, but this is really the beginning of a conversation. So we heard from the community survey, and now we would really like to hear from you guys. And what does sustainability look like in Littleton? What are some comments you have on what I've already gone over? And what else would you like us to be talking about?
So I'm just going to say, if you had something to say, unmute yourself and chime in. Anybody?
Steve, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Just as a point of interest, you mentioned Green Ribbon Schools. The Littleton School District, K through 12, has been designated as a Green Ribbon School.
Yes, that's fantastic.
Anybody have comments?
So Meryl and I have both at one point or another either watched a recording of the Sustainability Committee meeting, or Meryl actually attended one. And what we are hearing is that the Sustainability Committee is interested in becoming involved in this project and others in Littleton. And we wanted to let you know that now is really the time. None of these decisions have been made yet. And this is really a kickoff meeting, so to speak, in terms of sustainability. So if anybody from the committee has any insight on what the town goals in general are, or other things that have been coming up at those meetings, it would be great to hear those. Charlotte, you have your hand raised.
Go ahead,
Hi.
Charlotte.
Thanks, and thanks for the invite to join this conversation. So the Sustainability Committee in Littleton has a number of projects underway and several areas of focus, but I think one in particular that might be most aligned with this is working on the climate action plan. Other towns have a climate action plan, and Littleton is embarking on the initial processes of putting one together, following best practices from other towns and also following all the requisite guidance, local and state, etc. And so I see a lot of opportunity for us to take advantage of that process, to sort of capitalize on that momentum, and to make sure some of the things that we're working into the Shaker Lane School project are also reflected in that plan, and vice versa. I think it could be a really nice opportunity to showcase how some of the perhaps more theoretical sort of aspirational aspects of that plan can actually be put into practice. And so I think that that's one area which we could certainly talk a little bit more about. We've also been with Connor actually working on uptake of electric vehicles in Littleton and what kind of infrastructure is necessary to ensure increased uptake of electric vehicles. And so I think that's also another area of intersection. If I see that, EV ready is one of the elements of the Shaker Lane project. So again, I think that's a really great opportunity for increasing the momentum around that. And then one other, perhaps it's a little tangential, but is also the hazard mitigation plan that Littleton is putting together as well. That is really quite broad ranging in terms of the proposed actions, but many of them really obviously relate to sustainability. So something also that I think could be of interest. But the way I see it, this is all sort of culminating in momentum in the right direction. And so I'm just here to try to bridge a little bit, to the extent that I can, some of the work that we're doing on the Sustainability Committee side for Littleton generally. And certainly happy to answer whatever questions I can, and those that I can't, I'll certainly refer to my other team members, and we can get back to you at a later date as well.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for being here. I think I saw Eric's hand first.
Yeah, Charlotte, that's exciting news to hear that you're working on the climate action plan. I'm wondering if you could speak to kind of the general timing or some of the overarching kind of key elements of the plan. Perhaps now's not the time or place, but having a better understanding of what those may be will certainly help us align the project with those goals. I imagine this is one of the larger projects going on, and so it seems like a great opportunity to really set this as an example piece to demonstrate the commitment of that plan and start
Absolutely.
working towards it.
Thank you.
I can maybe provide the sort of 20-second response to that, and then we can certainly take that to another conversation. But it is a little bit of a lengthy process to get to the end state of the climate action plan. We're talking at least sort of 18 months, maybe even 2 years. It consists of research and analysis, community engagement, and then actually writing and ratifying the CAP. And it includes things like mobility, transportation, analysis of the town fleet, including school buses, energy, waste management, climate and sustainable education. So there are a lot of different pieces of the CAP that I think could intersect nicely. But I'm very happy to share just more information. We are at the very early stages of that, and we actually share a resource with a couple of other towns, a sustainability director, who's going to be helping us to develop that as well.
That's great. That's good timing, it sounds like. All right, Diane, I see your hand.
Diane Dickerson.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit about the climate action plan. To be honest, we're just starting down that road. We are sharing a resource across 4 other towns, and she's actually on the call tonight, but we just met her on Monday, so it's just beginning. I think one of the things along these lines, I'll reiterate a lot of what Charlotte said. But one of the things that I had been looking at was, even though Littleton is not a specialized opt-in stretch code community, if there's the, I think it will be all cost-wise, because, you know, if it's not significant, like, what is it? We can go as green as our green money will take us. So, so basically, kind of a comparison of what it might be to follow the couple of different options for the super stretch code. Even though the community's not that, it would seem to me that we could probably follow those, go in that direction.
That's actually an excellent segue into our next point. So if anybody wants to say anything more right now, we can. Otherwise, I can move on. All right. So the MSBA provides some opportunities for additional funding, and part of that is following the guidelines of the opt-in code, even if you're not an opt-in community. There are 2 categories. For looking at materials and air quality points, you can get an additional 1% reimbursement, and looking at reducing energy use, you can get another 3% reimbursement. And then a small percentage of this, there may be a possibility of getting incentives through federal and state. We'll talk more about that later, but we're not considering that to be a shoo-in for sure. So first, the easy part, the low-hanging fruit is this additional 1%. This is lead points, and we have to get at least 3 points out of all these categories at a bare minimum. And in order to get the 1% reimbursement, we need 2 more points, so 5 points total. And these are all relatively simple things to do. A lot of them are things that we as architects just do as our best practices. And so we anticipate easily getting this 1% reimbursement, and it would not incur any additional costs to the project. So we'll go ahead and get this additional 1%. Any comments on this?
Low emitting materials, talking like flooring, like VCT versus marmoleum, that kind of stuff.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
All right. So now things get a little bit more complex, and I am going to pass it over to Eric to get into the next few slides.
Sure. Again, what we want to do here is just kind of help you understand some of the lingo that we'll be using, and you'll see us asking us to set targets towards. And one of those is the EUI of a building, which is the energy use intensity. And basically what that is simply how much energy does the building consume, less anything produced by renewables, over the square footage, gives you this EUI value in kBTU per square foot per year. Basically, it's a measure of the performance of your building. And what we suggest is teams set a target early in the design, such that the design team has an understanding of what they're designing towards. We will be doing some energy modeling, which is computer simulation of building performance, which will help us actually understand what the EUI will be based on different design configurations, more aggressive envelope, different HVAC systems, lower flow fixtures, all of those design considerations that may go into the building all have an impact on the EUI. And so we want to just make sure everyone understands that terminology and is starting to think about, okay, how aggressive do we want to be at this school? So setting an EUI target, right? This is all conceptual at this point, right? Because we don't have any design or modeling complete, but a standard existing school may be around EUI of 75, right? But now with the more aggressive energy code in Massachusetts, even just that stretch code, right? It's going to drive that EUI number down significantly. On the left, with all the bulleted lists, you can see color coded to relative impact of energy reduction are some of the strategies that we could use to help drive down the EUI of a building. Now you'll see that as Mary Lee said, that the baseline MSBA requirement is to meet that Massachusetts stretch code requirement, but there is that additional 3% reimbursement for being more aggressive. There are some particular requirements to meeting that opt-in that we will talk about in a moment. But what you see is that meeting those more aggressive criteria will drop the EUI of the building to around that 25 number target. That's in line with a lot of the MSBA school projects that are in design or in operation, new schools in operation now. So certainly an achievable target. In communities that may be eligible for the Mass Save utility incentives, which Littleton is not because it's a muni, they require an EUI of 25 to participate in their most aggressive utility incentive program. So again, an achievable standard. It does take work, but certainly something that a well-designed project can achieve. Now, to drive down below that, the building will consume energy at this point, right? So to drive below that you'd have to offset that energy consumed in the building, and that would be through renewable energy strategies. As already mentioned in the past, there are some baseline requirements already for the PV ready, having the capacity to put PV on the building. If we go to the opt-in route, there is the potential for it to be required under certain criteria, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But this is just helping you understand the terminology and some of those large levers that we can pull to help reduce the energy consumption of this building. Diane, I see your hand.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned Mass Save.
Yeah.
We have been able to get some Mass Save incentives in town, even though we're a muni. So that may be something that we should look into, perhaps.
So my hunch, and we can certainly explore this, my hunch is, I believe you have N-Grid for gas, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
National Grid, yes.
So the National Grid, they participate in the Mass Save program. And so through that linkage, previously you could still get Mass Save utility incentives. However, I think in the last 6 months, a year, the program has changed such that they do not incentivize any gas equipment. If you have gas on a project, you're not eligible for Mass Save. The real push
think
is
you're
to
correct.
electrify everything. So that perhaps in the past that was the case. Moving forward, that isn't. It is no longer the case.
That may be the case. I know there have been some changes.
Yeah.
All right, I am going to pause here for a second. We want to make sure that everybody understands EUI because it's really going to contribute to our discussion that we're moving into next. Mark.
Eric, great to see you again. Thanks for
Yeah, good to see you.
thanks for all that information. I just want to say quickly, EUI, just so it might be a little simpler understanding, is like the MPG for your car, right? So miles per gallon, the efficiency of how you can make your car get better with the use of gasoline. That's kind of think about that when you think about EUI.
Yeah, and similarly, you could have a predicted EUI number, and your actual mileage may vary depending on how you actually operate the building, right?
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy. I like it. Any other questions before we shift on?
Yeah, my only question is, how much money do you have to spend to get this 3% reimbursement?
Well, that's good. We're going to talk about that as we move forward. Part of what we owe you in this phase is an assessment that will help you realize the all-in costs of different design configurations, particularly the HVAC system options under consideration. So stay tuned for more on that in a moment.
All righty.
That's a pretty good segue, I think, into the next slides. So now I will pass it over to Matt to guide us through these.
Yeah, so I think a lot of what, I think this slide is a lot of what has already sort of been touched on. Basically, in an ideal world, I think everyone would go for the additional 3%. That's extra money back to the town, with the obvious caveat to Steve's point that everyone asks is, okay, how much does it take to get there? Similar to a car. I mean, it's very easy to buy a very cheaply made car with a crappy engine, and it costs a little more to get one that is very fuel efficient. So basically, if you're talking about the 3% reimbursement, we're talking exactly what you're talking, Diane, with that opt-in specialized stretch code. So you would be meeting that is effectively the additional work being done to get that 3%. It's going from stretch code, which is a requirement for the town and for the MSBA, up to the opt-in code. And there's a couple of ways that the code's written that would allow us to get there. Basically, it kind of boils down to one option is really an all-electric option where you would electrify the building. As Eric mentioned, that's really largely the overarching trend. And I think to Charlotte's point earlier about, kind of following the guidance from other towns in the state, other communities, that would be doing that, would be the electrification option. For people who don't know what I'm talking about with that, that's just you're removing any natural gas or other fossil fuels as your fuel source for the building, and you're basically just plugging your building heating source into the electric grid. That may be advantageous for other reasons in terms of the electric rate for the town being quite low compared to other municipalities and other towns using different energy resources. But if that really wasn't desired by the committee here and by the community as a whole, it is possible to get the opt-in specialized stretch code and meet those requirements with a natural gas fuel mix in the building. That's where you run into some of those extra requirements that some of the other presenters have alluded to regarding actually needing to include not just PV ready, but actually paying for PV to be on the building and generating power there. Additionally, you have to wire the building and have the buildings, you effectively have to have a plan set in place such that you will be able to electrify the building in the future. So 20 years down the line, if sentiments in the town have changed, or the requirements of the state maybe have changed, it's basically trying to make it an easier transition down the road if the mandate effectively was to get off of fossil fuels and transition to an all-electric option. There's a lot going on there. Is there any specific questions on that?
Yeah, it sounds like
You
the
probably
deck
don't
is
have,
stacked against us on this one.
Go ahead, Diane.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said I think that this sounds like the deck is stacked against us on this one. If we wanted to have a gas option, we're not going to be in a good place on this reimbursement.
I guess I'd ask what I guess, elaborate a little bit more on that, Steve, what you mean, just so that I understand your concern and where you're coming from, and maybe we can discuss that further.
I don't want to get into it now, but it just seems that these mandates are forcing us towards all electric.
I mean, it's I won't lie, it's definitely it's the overall trend for a reason. I mean, it's a lot of it has to do with code pressure that has been coming down from the state, and there's directives that are trying to push people that way.
I know, I get it.
But also,
I'm not in favor of it, so
sure,
that's my 2 cents worth.
Sure.
And they are changing the code.
I know
slightly.
they are. I know they are.
It's too restrictive. That's why they're looking at it.
It's very restrictive.
They just recently, in the last month, issued some updates that do give a little bit of flexibility within some of the initially stated opt-in requirements. However, it hasn't changed the overall direction pushing for electrification. Technology has increased such that we have good equipment that can meet the heating needs in our climate, so it's certainly feasible to build a successful all-electric school, and the code is moving in that direction.
I know.
Diane, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it's probably not time for it in this discussion, but have there been comparisons of if you're building it all electric, this is the cost. If you're doing it mixed fuel and have to do the additions of wiring for electrification and the additional installations of equipment on site for renewable energy, how the costs compare?
There haven't to this point, but there will be.
Steve Mishner?
Matt, can you, I assume when you're talking about this needs to be ready for installing electrical equipment, that basically means the service is going to be upsized on a gas system, and you have to have all the distribution panels within the school sort of ready for, let's say, HVAC equipment that would be
I mean, you're primarily talking, the cost is going to come in the service primarily. So yeah, it's yes, you're effectively upsizing your electric for future, trying to future proof it for upcoming higher electric loads because of the electric heating source anticipated in the future.
And one other little thing, I think there had been some discussions, maybe we'll get to it further in here, but a gas-powered emergency generator whether it's diesel or natural gas. We're not talking about that equipment.
No.
That's just backup. So that would still be, if we had one of those in this project and all the other systems were electric, we'd still be in the all electric world.
That is correct.
Okay.
An important distinction there. So on the backup for the electric system, having a natural gas or diesel generator would still qualify the building as being defined as all electric under the code. I only bring this up because there was some discussion, I think, in some previous talks with some individuals regarding natural gas boiler backup for the building. That's a distinction, and in that instance, we would have to pursue the mixed fuel option. Go ahead, Mark.
Just real quick, folks, time check is now 7:38.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
So we'll carry on.
Sure. So this dovetails right into what we were just talking about, which I think, is important to everyone, right? It's everyone. We all have wallets, have bills to pay. So as part of the work here that we're going to be doing in the early design, really following this meeting and hopefully presenting at a later meeting, will be an analysis of some suggested HVAC systems that will effectively quantify all the things that we're talking about here, and is really probably going to be the primary driver, if we're being honest, of a decision on the part of the town. It's going to be looking at the upfront costs, operating costs, replacement costs over a 50-year anticipated life of these systems and the building as a whole, and we'll be comparing that to a code compliant baseline system, and have a report that will be issued indicating what systems effectively have a good payback, return on investment, what has the best EUI in terms of energy performance, and what really makes dollars and cents logic. So that being said, we have really 3 options currently, but including a 4th one here on this slide, and we'd like to get some feedback from the committee here. Basically, what I'm looking for as a takeaway from this is a blessing of these options to be studied. So without really I could spend 2 hours talking about this, but in the sake of time, we're gonna talk at a very high level, and if anyone has specific questions, feel free to jump in and ask. But basically, the first option is probably the most different from the others. It's a air source heat pump system. It's called VRF. Basically, what happens is you have refrigerant flowing through the building to air conditioners effectively in each zone, and they also do heating. And there's a bank of condensing units with coils and fans on the roof, and the refrigerant going between the two carries the heat and cool throughout the building to each space, and rejects the heat into the exterior in the summertime, and pulls the heat from the exterior and pumps it into the school in the wintertime. I'm not going to go through every single one of these line items here, but basically the bottom line is that can achieve the 3% from the MSBA. One thing to note about that, really, in comparison to the other systems, and something to be talked about with anyone who's maintenance staff for the district, would be this system sort of has a more distributed nature of maintenance. So you kind of want to think of it as there's many smaller individual components. So there's components in every space that will require maintenance. There will be filters that will need to be changed. They're in classrooms. Some school districts don't like that. Some of them say we're not used to it. We don't want to be entering classrooms to do maintenance. Some of them like that. Okay, well, these are sort of modular pieces, so I can have a bunch in attic stock, and if something goes, it's just one piece getting plug and play a little bit more than some of the others. One other caveat I'll add to option one is it is in a sense locks you into a manufacturer, which some districts don't like, some do like. You have a single source when something goes wrong, but you're locked into that source in a sense, in that you're going to buy the system from one manufacturer, and that's manufacturer A. 5 years down the road, something breaks, you can't go to manufacturer B and plug it into the system. It needs to all speak the same language. So that's just a reality of option one. Option 2 and 3 are very similar. They're effectively the same system. The only thing that is different is the source of heat that is being used for the heat pump system. So in option 2, very similar to option 1, there's some equipment that's going to be on the roof. It's going to have some coils and fans, and that's going to be pulling heat from the exterior in the wintertime and rejecting heat from the building to the exterior in the summertime. In option 3, you, instead of having that outdoor equipment, would be doing what is sort of a misnomer, but called geothermal. You have well fields drilled, substantial costs, also substantial energy savings by comparison, and all of that will be borne out as part of the life cycle and will show the comparison of these systems. I will say if there's any concerns about site noise or neighbors being affected, option 3 does have the lowest site sound, just because there's no exterior fans really running, rejecting and pulling that heat from the ambient temperatures. It's all hydronic. There's pumps running down into the ground wells with that, so there's an advantage there. Both 2 and 3 have, I mean, all these options are relatively quiet. 2 and 3 are quieter than option 1, just because how we are introducing the air into each space. It's going to be at a very low velocity. There's no fans in the classrooms and offices the way that there are in option 1. Because of that, the maintenance is also much more centralized by comparison to option 1. You effectively have all your heating and cooling being done from heat pump units, either on the roof or in a mechanical room. So there's sort of a sole source there, and you don't have to really go into classrooms and interrupt kind of building occupants, maybe in a way that you may be liable to do with option 1. As a source of just reference, I would say option 1, without having done the analysis, option 1 is likely the lowest upfront cost of the 3. But the numbers we've been seeing come in, it's not generally substantially so. Option 2 is probably the option we are seeing selected most frequently as of very recent. We have done all 3 of these options in the schools recently. Our firm has done a lot of schools. I would say option 2 is probably the most common. Option 3 is probably a bit more of a reach, partly to do with it was being very popular for a little while with Inflation Reduction Act dollars being accounted for. We can talk a little bit more about how much that wants to be looked at. I think there's some very serious reality that language and program may be not something we want to count on strongly, but if that's that's the feedback we want to hear from the community.
So I think my take on the whole thing, Matt, is the community needs to vote on this to advance the project, and the appetite is going to be for the lowest possible price. I don't like option one.
Yep.
I like option two. Option three, I used at the Social Security building up in wherever it was, but that's more aspirational. We need to focus on, keeping the cost down.
Understood. Charlotte?
Thanks, and thanks for the really clear presentation of these options. Along a similar line, I'm wondering if there is a different metric that you're perhaps familiar with using around cost, more of a cost effectiveness metric. It seems like at least for instance, amortizing or accounting for the replacement cost, and sort of building in some of those energy recovery costs, noting the difference here in the potential EUI with option 3 having the lowest. So again, if we're looking at trying to make an informed decision as a community, I think it would be really helpful to present those numbers in a way that we can really interpret not just what those upfront costs are, but what we're really looking at ultimately paying over the lifetime of the school.
I agree with that, Charlotte, but nobody's really going to take that into account when they go into that tax calculator. They're not going to say, oh, great, we're going to save X number of dollars 20 years from now. So I think we have to look at the reality of making this an affordable project.
And ideally, I think, definitely something we talk about a lot in the Sustainability Committee, that trying to marry perhaps both of those to the extent that we can, reducing the upfront cost, the sticker shock of the project. But I think maybe also if there's a way of illustrating these costs so that they can be interpreted as best as possible. But I agree, Stephen, absolutely. It's going to be that price tag that people are going to be most focused on, 100%.
So is the option 2, and it's estimated to be about 2.4 million more. So a couple of questions. What option did we carry in the initial, when we came up with the initial tag of the project? Originally was 104 million and now it's down to 98 something million. What option was carried in those plans? And the second part of that question is, and I like option 2 as well. I mean, I don't have a problem going all electric. We want to go as green as possible within the budget. We've said that a number of times. If option 2 is an additional roughly 2.5 million additional, does this get us to qualify for the 3% additional funding from MSBA?
Yes.
And so does a 3% additional funding from MSBA offset the 2.4 million?
It likely would.
so.
I think what's relevant there as well, though, is that option 1 would achieve that 3% as well. So it's not really a apt comparison, because you're not doing that extra 2.4 to achieve the 3%. It's there would be other reasons, and there would probably be due to operational costs largely.
Okay.
Which would be borne out in the and just overall system and maintenance preference is usually what it comes down to more than anything. But that would be indicated in the results of the life cycle analysis.
Mary Lee, weren't you saying that the option 2 was in the original estimate?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, option 2 was carried as the basis of design. So this 2.4 was already baked into the whatever the final number ended up being, I don't recall. And so then option 1 would be 2.4 less than that. Although for what Matt said, since November of 2024, these numbers are maybe coming in a little bit closer to each other than they had been. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean, I say that based on other projects that I've seen recently. So
Mhm.
that's more of a general observed trend, but that would be borne out in cost estimating.
All right, so somebody explain to me a little bit more about the maintenance and operation when you say it's distributed versus more centralized. Explain just a little bit
Just
more
real
for me.
quick, folks, 10 minutes, 10 minutes.
Hey, Steve, I think we used option 2 on the library and the senior center.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So I think that's kind of the that would be my recommendation.
Good feedback, Steve. Thank you for that. I
But
can-
there would be an option to save money if we didn't want to go all electric, obviously, and take option 2. So even though it's in the estimate now,
Yeah. Yes.
okay, so there's VE there,
Yeah.
if we wanted to.
So, sorry, Steve, Mark, do you want me to answer your question here still?
Yeah, and if we don't have time, maybe you can just
I can take it offline with you. I'm happy to write an email and distribute it to the group.
yeah, maybe do it that way, I think. Instead, I don't want to waste the time now because
Yeah. All right. I'll do that. That's no problem.
I'm the one that manages the maintenance, so I want to make sure I understand what it is.
Sure. And just to not to rush through the last option here, but or one that I'm sort of asked. I guess my ask to the group is, we've talked about wanting to align. It sounds like there's a general sustainability committee intent to align with overall trends and other state trends. In terms of electrification, do we want to entertain the mixed fuel option? Should we study the mixed fuel option in terms of having natural gas, or is that something that we just do not feel is appropriate for the community?
Let me ask another question. On the all electric option, does that mean we don't bring natural gas into the building at all? So it's not there for kitchen appliances and cook stoves and tilt kettles and things like that, or do those all become all electric as well?
My understanding is that is correct. And Studio G or
Okay.
Green Engineer
I just
can
wanna make
correct
sure I
me if
understand.
that's wrong, but I believe you are right when you say that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, Diane.
So my other question is, and I'm sure it's been thought of, we live in New England, we get to days where it's -5 degrees and 5 degrees and for prolonged days at a time. The heat pumps with the VAV or whatever, are they able to meet the demand of a 5-degree day for a week?
Yes, so for 5-degree, definitely. I mean, 5-degree is very likely going to be our design condition, and in terms of what the code requires us to meet in terms of weather data locally. It's a very common question that's asked. Often these are rated down to 0 degrees and even lower on some of them. With the air source option, we would suggest having, and we'll price in our life cycle analysis, having like an electric boiler for backup exclusively. Effectively, it's not particularly efficient, but it is still electric and would basically help you out in a sort of a freeze protection sort of situation if you ever lost multiple modules from your heat pump, or it was just really -10 or something like that, and you just had to limp through for a day or two. That would assist in that as part of the design.
So you're talking like a high efficiency boiler that's tucked away in the basement in a utility room that's a backup to this system.
Yeah, backup and supplementing on a day maybe when it was just really, really, really cold outside.
Okay, and so that's how.
I just want to make the note that it's an electric piece of equipment. It's not, because you mentioned high efficiency. It's electric. It's not gas.
Okay.
So we have, I think, just one more question, and then we want to talk just very briefly about a little bit more funding and then what's coming after this. So Diane, you have your hand up.
Just a quick comment. Someone asked if that also meant no gas in kitchens and stuff. I believe that is the case from everything I've read. But the new senior center is all electric, and it's a completely electric kitchen operation, all commercial kitchen type design as well.
That's correct. Yep.
All right, thank you. Eric?
Aside from the fact that they don't cook anything at the senior center.
Well, I'll just tell you right
we
now,
do a lot of cooking at the schools, so.
Steve, we have a kitchen consultant who can really talk you and your staff through all of the options available and answer any questions or concerns they might have about making the switch to electric if that's what's decided.
I don't have a problem with it. I just, want to make sure we understand what we're getting ourselves into. Look, I'm the first one to be out there saying we should go as green as, and I've said this before, go as green as possible, go all electric if we can within the budget. I'm all for it.
Great.
So running low on time here, so this is quick, right? We certainly want to take advantage of any available incentive dollars that are outside of the MSBA process for that. There are some available state incentives depending on the HVAC equipment selected that we can take advantage of. As Matt mentioned, there were quite favorable incentives that were available through the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, that given the current state of affairs, are no longer can be counted on. We can't read the future. They are still passed by Congress and should have to be canceled by Congress, but that's not exactly what's happening at the current state. So we have to be cautious, and we will be, but we'll continue to explore the potential incentive options available for the project.
Thank you. All right.
And
So
some of these incentives we wouldn't apply till later once a building gets started anyway. Is that correct?
Correct. Most pay out post hoc, right after they're all installed and operational.
Okay. So we're talking 3 or 4 years away. So maybe environment then.
All right. Thank you all so much, everybody. This was a really excellent conversation. The next SBC meeting is March 19th. I'm sure you'll all be thinking about this, digesting it, speaking to one another. And so on March 19th, we'll be doing a check-in with you to see if you have any preliminary preferences or thoughts on how we want to proceed. Then we'll have the second workshop where we'll have the life cycle cost analysis information there. And then we can really have all the information that we have in order to make a final decision.
All right. Any other last minute questions, comments? All right. If not, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll see everybody at a later date. Thank you.